Shattered. L.A. Nights, Book 5. Written by Sylvie Fox. Narrated by Stephen Barnett. Chapter 1. Adonis. "Is that what you're really called?" Gemma Hart's accented voice shook Adonis Andreas from his thoughts. His grip loosened. He watched the rubber, wood, and hardened steel just miss his steel-reinforced toes. The hammer he'd been holding plunked loudly to the floor. The dent the steel head made in the floor was not insignificant. He closed his eyes in defeat. Using his now empty hand to massage away the pain that was surely going to gather in his head, he added the depression in the wood to his mental punch list of things he'd have to fix before this job was done. That day couldn't come soon enough. Before he could get down from the middle rung of his ladder, Gemma reached down, picked up the tool, and handed it to him. The face that looked up to him was all wide eyes and innocence. It was the kind of face that could win awards. It was the face that had won 2 Academy Awards. He'd watched her carefully move the gold statuettes before he'd demolished the sagging particle board shelving in her den. Adonis closed his own eyes again, blocking out the clear blue eyes staring up at him guilelessly, blocking out the slim ankles, one adorned with the little bandage tattoo that had intrigued him from day one, swatting from his mind the fine silk of her russet hair, the same color as fall leaves in Chicago's autumn. Employers were off limits. Gemma Hart was not only off limits, but from another planet altogether, and their 2 species were not meant to interact. Didn't mean he hadn't noticed that she was attractive. Cute, really, in a sprightly leprechaun sort of way. Scratch that. A sexy leprechaun sort of way. But strictly 100% off limits. Settling the hammer into a leather loop on his tool belt, he opened his eyes and turned to look at his employer more closely, then regretted it. Leprechaun was not exactly the right comparison. Sexy, red-haired siren would have been far more accurate. And more dangerous. He'd never been able to turn down a damsel in need. It had always been his downfall. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking the curvy, red-headed woman up and down to assess the nature of her question, not to satisfy any curiosity about how she looked in a never-before-seen short skirt and tight-fitting tank top. "Is Adonis your real name?" she asked, jogging his short-term memory. Right. She'd interrupted him while he was framing out a termite-ridden wall that needed replacing to ask him, not about timelines, or materials, or cost, but to ask about his name. Because that wasn't the first time he'd heard the question. Carefully, he swallowed his sarcastic response, remembering he was finishing out this job as a favor to his dad. "Yeah, sure, Greek dad," he said by way of explanation. "You met him, proud man with definite ideas on the way things should be." He slipped his right hand down to his side, ready to lift the hammer from the leather loop when she spoke again. "Is it a hard name to live with?" Her hard was posh British accent all the way, worlds away from his flat, Chicago-style A's. "No harder than any other, I expect," he said. He pulled his gaze from her and turned back toward the exterior wall. "You never noticed this was light cottage cheese?" he asked as he pointed to what used to be 2x4 wall studs. Once he'd removed the plaster, Adonis had wondered what had held up the wall for the last handful of years. The wood, thanks to western subterranean termites, looked like a slice of Swiss cheese, but with a lot more holes. Gemma looked from him to the wall and back, but didn't answer. For an awkward minute or 2, they stood in uncomfortable silence. Then she backed away, eventually turning around and scurrying to wherever she holed up during the day. This was the most contact they'd had in the 3 months he'd worked at her house, and there hadn't been one time it was anything less than awkward. Gemma Hart had to be the weirdest person he'd ever worked for, and in Southern California, where hippies and actors outnumbered the wildlife, that was saying a lot. Lifting his hammer, he went back to work. If this wall was the last huge change order, he could get this.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?